I'm Mark Blumenthal, founder and executive director of the nonprofit American Botanical Council. I'm speaking with you today from Austin, Texas on July 6, 2020. One of the most frequent questions that I receive from people in all kinds of venues when I'm out public speaking, magazine or media interviews, all radio shows, etc. Over the last 46 years that I've been in this industry and this community is, how did I get into this space in the first place? How did I get into the herb business, the herb advocacy area, the herb research and education area? And it goes back to around 1968. I was a senior at the University of Texas in Austin in the spring semester, about to graduate, or so I thought. And I was going to go on to study political science and philosophy and get a master's or a PhD. That was what I thought was going to be my trajectory for my life, as a political science major and a philosophy minor back in the day. And not surprisingly, I was involved somewhat with the anti-war movement, because in 1968 there was a great deal of buildup for the Vietnam War. And we would watch the evening news, the Walter Cronkite or the Huntley-Brinkley report on NBC, and they would report daily the amount of deaths of American soldiers, South Vietnamese soldiers, North Vietnamese soldiers, and Viet Cong, in a little box like in the upper right-hand corner, as if it were like the daily baseball or football scores. And it got to the point where communicating the death toll on a daily basis of American and non-American young men, whoever, became tantamount to communicating the daily sports report. And I just cringed about what seemed to me to be the devaluation and the discounting of the sacredness and the value of human life as it was being, the deaths were being communicated. And I got very sensitized to that. And I realized that as a philosophy student, I had to study what was the meaning of all this. Why is this important to me, or why should it be important to me? And long story short, in May of 1968, I became a vegetarian as a protest against that type, not only of the war itself, but more importantly, the level of consciousness in our society that allowed that to happen. I believe that human life is sacred. In my tradition of Judaism, we say l'chaim when we toast someone, which means to life. Life is sacred. All life is sacred. And I became aware of the fact that I relied on somebody else, the butcher, the retail grocer, to basically do the dirty work for me in killing animals that I realized I didn't have the emotional interest or ability to kill myself. I never liked hunting as a child, as a kid. I went out sometimes with friends going hunting for birds or rabbits, but it didn't interest me. So I became a vegetarian out of all this, and I am still a vegetarian. So 52 years later, I'm a vegetarian. I started going to health food stores in the Austin, Texas area in 1968. And health food stores back then were not the natural food grocery stores like Whole Foods that we see today. They weren't even the natural food stores that started proliferating the environment in the early 1970s with the big bins of granola and the wholesome organic grains and things like that. They had some. But health food stores back in the day, late 60s, were primarily stores full of pills and foods for special dietary use, people who are diabetic, people who need low sodium diets, etc. Back in those days, if you wanted yogurt, you couldn't find yogurt in a grocery store, conventional. You could only find it in a health food store. If you wanted vitamin C, you had to go to a health food store. If you wanted whole wheat bread, you usually had to go to a health food store to get that. Things that we take for granted as part of a healthy diet were in the domain of so-called health food stores back then. That's what they were called. And then later in the early 70s, the natural food movement started happening, and they became more food, and with these other foods for special dietary use and many of these supplements. Going into these stores, I went there to find ways to get protein as a vegetarian. How can I best survive using protein without relying on animal sources? Although back then I was a lacto-ovo vegetarian, I did eat cheese and I did use eggs, and I still do occasionally, although I'm probably 90%, 95% vegan. In those stores back then, I found some books and some folkloric material, folk medicine information on medicinal plants and also wild edible plants. And that fascinated me. And I started reading these books as kind of a hobby, as an interest. Later on, 1970 to 72, I ended up living in a commune up near Taos, New Mexico, off the grid, no running water, no electricity, a whole earth catalog thing. And I became more interested in sustainability and living closer to the earth and natural methods for healing, et cetera, et cetera. I started beekeeping back in those days and did that when I moved back to Austin in 1972. I had some dairy goats for a short time, had a small organic farm in East Austin before that became popular. And I've always been, since the late 60s, early 70s, very interested in natural health and natural living and plant-based diet. So in 1974, it was not a stretch for me when I met somebody who was selling ginseng roots that he had bought in Chinatown in San Francisco. And I bought what he thought was the most expensive or most high-priced root at the time. I think it was $20 for a Korean red ginseng root, which I just wanted to suck on and get for energy, because he was surprised that I knew anything about ginseng in 1974. Hard to find people who knew anything about ginseng in 1974. He and I started an herb company we called Sweetheart Herbs, which was his last name and his then wife's last name combined. Sweetser and Steinhardt became Sweetheart Herbs. He dropped out after a year. I kept the business going for 12 years. It was a wholesale business. We bought herb products and herbs from mainly West Coast producers and importers, and we wholesaled these herbs in the Austin area, Dallas, Fort Worth, San Antonio, then New Orleans, Oklahoma City, etc. And that's how I got into this community. I don't say how I got into the industry, because to me, the herb agenda and my activity in the herb world is about community, which goes well beyond what one might define as a commercial industry. But I am grateful for, and I guess I might say proud of, although I'm not interested in pride, I'm grateful for the fact that I had 12 years of activity in the herb industry as a herb wholesaler. And during that time, in 1976, I got involved with helping to set up structure for the nascent and incipient herb industry at that time. So we started a group called the Herb Trade Association, which was designed to try to help start communication among various herb companies. Even if we were competitors, we were friendly competitors, and try to develop standards and ways of improving what was then the industry. I was elected president of the Herb Trade Association in 1979. And by 1981, after several other presidents after me, the association faltered and went out of business. And some of us got together again back in 1982 and then started we started the actual American Herbal Products Association, APA. So I'm grateful to have been at the table and part of the original board of directors of the American Herbal Products Association. during that time, at Herb Trade Association and at APA, and a small group that I helped co-found with Rob McCaleb at Celestial Seasonings called the Herb Research Foundation, I started a small newsletter that initially looked like a telegram. We called it Herbalgram, because we wanted to communicate to people what's going on with herbs. And back then, now we're talking now, late 70s, there was no email, there was no internet. To get information, there's no fax machines, or if there were, we didn't have one. There was telex machines that people used to communicate to Europe and Asia when they're buying and trading spices and botanicals. So I would have to print this Herbalgram on pieces of paper, like on a mimeograph machine and later on at a printing company. And we'd have to staple them and fold them and collate them and put them in an envelope and address them and mail them out to several hundred people in the community that we knew. And information we had back in the day was a little bit about research, a little bit about regulatory issues, because the FDA at that time had really very, very shallow and misinformation-based knowledge on herbs. There was very little media, and I became more interested in the communication part of all of it than any of the other parts of the herb community. And I eventually let go of my business. I focused on the communication, Herbalgram. And Herbalgram became the official publication of the American Herbal Products Association and the Herb Research Foundation for over 5 years. And then that was from 1983 to 1988. I was still doing other things and consulting and running different herb businesses at that time. Had different products that I would sell under my own label. And then in 1988, I started the American Botanical Council as a vehicle to take Herbalgram, which at that point, we had published 17 quarterly newsletters that had grown from 8 to 12 to 16 to 24 page newsletter, black and white, basically. My vision for Herbalgram was Scientific American, National Geographic. That's how I saw Herbalgram to be. So I started this nonprofit, the American Botanical Council, as a tax-exempt 501c3 research and education organization, initially solely to be a vehicle, a nonprofit vehicle to take Herbalgram, this newsletter I was doing on the side for these two organizations, one a trade association and one a research and education organization. I wanted Herbalgram to go beyond that, and that became my full-time job, in effect, and ABC was founded. The name ABC is interesting, by the way. How did I come up with American Botanical Council, I get asked. And I said to myself, I'm going to start another organization to get Herbalgram off the ground and take it to another level. And the acronym for this organization should be as easy to remember as ABC. ABC, American Botanical Council. And that's how we got our name. The acronym came first, then the name. So people still say, well, how are things at the American Botanical Society? And I want to say, and what is it about ABC that you don't understand? I don't say, well, it's out American Botanical Council, thank you, and here's what's going on. Since those early days in 1988, again, as a vehicle to take Herbalgram, which is still our flagship publication. It's one of now 6 different publications that we produce. The rest of them are all digital. But Herbalgram is digital and printed. It's the only printed publication we have. And people have compared it to Scientific American, and they have compared it to National Geographic. Matter of fact, this last holiday, we got a check from somebody, a holiday gift from somebody with a little note saying, my wife and I, we recycle all of our magazines except 2, National Geographic and Herbalgram. Thank you. So ABC is based on Herbalgram, but over the years, we morphed into many other projects. We had a huge catalog of books that we used to sell back in the day before the advent of Amazon, and we had probably the largest collection of high-quality science and technically based books available anywhere, and as people would often say, even some professors of pharmacognosy, the study of medicinal plants of natural origin, the study of drugs from natural origin, Pharmacognosy. Professor Norman Farnsworth, one of our founders of ABC, once said, even if you don't buy a book from the ABC catalog, just reading the catalog and seeing the breadth and the depth of the type of literature that's available on the quality and the chemistry and the pharmacology and the ethnobotany and the modern research on medicinal plants is educational and instructive and constructive in and of itself. So, in honoring my mentors and the people in the scientific community that helped start ABC and who've been so involved, many of others who've been so involved in creating the scientific underpinning in the last 40 years for research in herbal medicine, ethnobotany, pharmacognosy, these different related fields, I'm often asked, well, how'd you meet these people? During the days of the Herb Trade Associations, from 1976 on to 1980, the original executive director of HTA was a wonderful gentleman named Paul Lee, who's still living in Santa Cruz, California, where he had formerly been a professor of philosophy at the University of California in Santa Cruz. And Paul had a real penchant and passion for herbs and herbal medicine. And as director of ABC, he came up with the idea of setting up, in 1977, the first of what became several symposia, the term he chose, on herbal medicine. And he invited Jim Duke and Norman Farnsworth and Vero Tyler and Walter Lewis, who's an ethnobotanist from St. Louis, and Erida Martirosyan, a professor of pharmacognosy in Philadelphia, and many other people who at that time in the late 70s were the people in the United States in the academic community that were publishing, researching, and or teaching about the scientific basis of herbs and medicinal plants. So at this wonderful college campus, beautiful campus at the University of California at Santa Cruz, you had people from the industry, you had all these hippies, you had these academics who were feeling a little bit out of the water, a little bit with a lot of the hippies, but we all got along really well because we all had a common interest, which is medicinal plants. And not only just medicinal plants, but how people have co-evolved and utilized plants for food, for fiber, for shelter, for fragrance, for color, for ritual, for medicine throughout history and way beyond in prehistory for hundreds of thousands of years. We have co-evolved with the plants and the fungi that surround us and create the biosphere. And as Jim Duke used to be happy to say, and he would say it all the time, people did not co-evolve with synthetic pharmaceutical drugs. They've only been around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, depending on what the drug is. But people have co-evolved with the compounds found in medicinal plants. They've been part of our diet, they've been part of our medicine, depending on what continent you live in or came from, depending on what group of people you come from. But people have evolved using plants as medicine. And that connection with Jim Duke and Norman Farnsworth and Professor Tyler and Lewis and Martirosyan and so many other people fascinated not only myself, but a lot of other people. And the dialogue started happening. I was part of the center of some of that dialogue, but certainly it wasn't limited just to me. I loved communicating with these people. Matter of fact, Jim Duke, he used to send me stuff. He would have all this stuff photocopied, the stuff I didn't even ask for. Every month, I got a big manila envelope with all kinds of photocopies of scientific papers, some of which I found interesting, some of which were just chemical analysis and chemical profiles of stuff, which I did not find as much as interesting. I'm not a chemist. I'm more interested in ethnobotany and the clinical aspects of herbs. The cool thing about Jim Duke was he had franking privileges at USDA, which means as a government employee, he can send mail for free. He didn't have to buy stamps or run it through a postage meter. So in order to make sure that the mailing department wouldn't kick back all this stuff that he would send to me and presumably dozens of other people, because that's the way Jim was. Jim just loved to hand stuff out. He was very generous of heart and spirit, just constantly sharing. He would have it addressed to Dr. Mark Blumenthal. And I have no doctorate. I have no advanced degree. I quit college and finished in 68 and took a different turn, as I mentioned earlier. So Jim Duke was the first person to call me Dr. Blumenthal, but that was in order for the mail to get through for free at the taxpayer's expense. And he was seeding the Herbal Renaissance, a term that I borrow gratefully and respectfully from Dr. Paul Lee, who the aforementioned gentleman who started these string of 3 or 4 symposia in California back in the late 70s. The Herbal Renaissance. Jim Duke helped seed that Herbal Renaissance with all this scientific information that he would get from the U.S. government archives. So, I want to take a side note here to honor some people who are some of my elders. Because in starting ABC, I went to 2 of my favorite elders, both of whom have passed. The famous botanist Jim Duke, James A. Duke, ethnobotanist who at that time was the leading medicinal plant expert in the entire U.S. government. He was in charge of medicinal plant research, such as it was at the United States Department of Agriculture. And the world famous Professor Norman R. Farnsworth, who's one of the great professors of pharmacognosy in the world at the University of Illinois at Chicago at the College of Pharmacy there. They helped me start ABC, and the 3 of us were the first 3 board members of ABC on November 1st, 1988. And about 4 years later, the 4th board member joined us, Professor Vero E. Tyler, professor of pharmacognosy at Purdue University and vice president of the university for 5 years. He was provost. And the day after he retired from the university, he joined the board of ABC. So ABC was founded not just by myself, but with the help and the goodwill and the door-opening capacity of these 3 silver-haired gentlemen who were my elders and my mentors in the area of ethnobotany and pharmacognosy, 2 of the major sciences that underpin the herbal medicine movement. And thank you, by the way, also to my dear friend and colleague, Stephen Foster, who's an incredible botanist and author, but probably one of the world's premier, if not the world's premier photographer of medicinal and aromatic plants, because Stephen has been generously providing us beautiful photography for the covers and many of the articles of Herbalgram since we started as a magazine. And he's been part of the DNA of this organization and this magazine since we started. I think he wrote a short article in Herbalgram number 2. So part of what Herbalgram's about is conveying the beauty of the form and the colors of plants. And if we could do scratch and sniff ink with the fragrance of them, we would do that too, but we'd probably get sued from somebody who's chemically sensitive or something when they got it in their mailbox. So we don't do scratch and sniff inks with natural but that's coming someday, I think. Probably if they got 3D printers, why not scratch and sniff ink? That's probably less technologically advanced. In essence, ABC is a science organization. We are co-founded by scientists, and the idea is that our agenda is to share and communicate and help foster and help inculcate the scientific research that supports the safety and the increasing documentation of the benefits of hundreds, if not thousands, of herbs and medicinal plants and fungi from around the world. that have evolved with us over time. And when I first started going to health food stores, looking for information on vegetarianism and started getting turned on to herbs, the information that turned me on was folkloric in nature, which has its place and something I respect. It's folklore. It's part of the human experience, communication of how our grandmothers and their grandmothers and our grandmothers to the nth power, going back hundreds of generations, have taken the legacy and the heritage of this planet and shared it with us through the oral traditions and the written traditions. And I say the grandmothers because in many societies, maybe most societies, the women are the ones who are often the guardians of this knowledge. So ABC respects ethnobotany and folkloric information. It's the foundation for what we do in many ways. At the same time, back in 1968 and early 70s, there was not much scientific research. It was just starting to happen at a level that was starting to mushroom. And over the years, a lot of this research was happening primarily in Europe. Scientific research on medicinal plants, clinical trials on medicinal plant, phytomedicinal products, etc. But that information wasn't coming in to the United States. It wasn't reaching the herb industry. It wasn't reaching healthcare practitioners, researchers, and many people, unless they were really a researcher in the area of pharmacognosy, like Professor Farnsworth, like ethnobotanist Jim Duke, like Professor Tyler and others. A lot of that stuff was not getting in, especially a lot of it was in German, and it was not being translated into English. And even then, even many of the journals, the German journals, didn't even often have English abstracts. So since the early 1980s, part of the mission of Herbalgram and eventually ABC in '88 was to take this growing body of information that's coming from scientific research, primarily in Western Europe, but not exclusively, and summarize some of the relevant information and publish it in Herbalgram and promote it to other publications through ABC. So in a sense, ABC became kind of like a public relations agency for the growing herbal agenda and the herbal movement. We helped promote and educate about the growing body of clinical research, particularly, that showed safety and a growing body of evidence documenting benefits, efficacy for many herbs that are today considered commonplace. ABC was one of the first organizations and publications, Herbalgram, to communicate about milk thistle, about ginkgo. We were some of the first to communicate about the research on echinacea, the scientific research on echinacea. We chose echinacea, by the way, as our organizational logo in 1988 for several reasons. One, it's a beautiful flower. Two, it's a Native American medicinal plant. Three, it was one of the most revered medicinal plants of the Plains Indians. Four, there was a growing body of scientific research on it. And five, there are some species of echinacea that are endangered, that were federally listed endangered species. So echinacea to us covers so many aspects of the agenda for ABC, of the mission of ABC. Research, ethnobotanical use, conservation-related issues, and sustainability. And of course, the beauty and the morphology and the shape that flowers and plants provide us on an aesthetic level. Not just medicinal or chemical or energetic, but the energy of the beauty and the color. Since then, there have been many people on the board of ABC, on the advisory board, over 130 people on our advisory board internationally, dozens and dozens of employees who have supported ABC and to whom I am deeply grateful. Employees, some of whom are still with us today, ABC, as we get ready to celebrate our 32nd anniversary. in November of 2020. And I have several employees from the day we started. So I have several employees that have 32 and 31 years with ABC, one contractor for internet and digital IT stuff for 30 years, a woman who's been with us for 25 years doing our website and special projects and educational projects, and on and on. We've been very fortunate to have longevity among our employees who are deeply committed to the nonprofit research and education mission of ABC, as well as thousands of members of ABC. A shout out and gratitude to all of you, members from the natural products community and industry, but beyond that, members from the research and academic communities, people who are alternative health professionals and health medical doctors who are integrative medicine doctors, naturopaths, herbalists, acupuncturists, all kinds of people, pharmacists, pharmacognossists, ethnobotanists, pharmacologists, botanical gardens, arboreta, universities, libraries. We have a very wide bandwidth of membership in 81 countries here at ABC. So I feel very grateful to have been able to hitch a ride, so to speak, and found a path, or maybe as some people think sometimes the path found me, as maybe the way it is for us when you're ready. And I'm still enjoying this opportunity to promote ABC's nonprofit educational mission and our book now. Thank you.